Thanks, Mark.
I always think it's a little bit fair to let people
Thank you.
know that.
Yeah.
You know what seems to be left out in this whole dialogue on this proposal is the small homeowner,
Yeah.
the person that has a two-family house in the Bronx.
Oh, you mean small
And
landlord?
they live in one unit. Can you hear me okay, Melissa?
Yeah, I said, did you mean small landlord?
Yeah, they own a two-family house and they live in one unit and they rent out rooms, which is very, very common in the boroughs. And the immediate thing that happened, and a lot of them get HRA, the roomers get their rent paid by HRA and they're required to pay $50, sort of thing. And then the HRA pays the bulk of the rent. But you do have some that pay the going rate. So a room in the Bronx, 2019 and 2000 is $800 for a room, okay? And this is a shared space where you're sharing the dining room, the commode and the shower and sort of thing. So we're not talking about a contained room with a toilet and all that, kitchenette and the whole thing. And the moment I heard the governor's declaration that there's going to be a moratorium on rent paying, even if they have the steady stream of income, which many of them do, a lot of them have separate funds that pay their rent. You have a number of university students that pay allowances and all. Stop paying their rent altogether, okay? And even the ones that are paying, say, $50, stop paying the $50. And then we get into the usual part of the conversation where we say, where the governor was saying that there's a postponement of 3 months. What they're hearing is a forgiveness of 3 months rent. So they don't owe anybody any kind of money. And the whole proposal just seems to be not thoroughly thought out, like a political act, and almost equivalent to a photo op, and where it hasn't really been thoroughly thought out. So if there is going to be a voucher, the landlord doesn't need it, the tenant would need it so he can pay his rent. And so I think that's a missing, I'm sorry, let me turn this off. The payment, the landlord shouldn't have to justify why they would need a voucher. You have water, you have electricity, you have this cost and that cost, upkeep of a small property, a two-family house, taxes, and it just seems to put another burden on the small homeowner. And I use that as an example because I manage a few of those properties. But in the boroughs, there are great numbers of them. They're in the Bronx, in Queens, they're all over the place, where you have this small owner that suddenly is confronted with this additional burden of fighting a tenant to pay their rent. And
I think it's hard all around. I mean.
But I don't want to be facile about this. I really don't want to be facile about this. Of course, it's hard all around. But the idea that part of the thought is, well, we're going to give the landlord a voucher. Then those who have a need, all of these landlords have a need. Now, I have one landlord in what used to be an affordable part of Williamsburg, and this is a big manager, and this is who you're talking about.
All right, Robert, can I pause you for a second? Just want to say to everyone who just joined, we're going to get started in a few minutes. We're just chatting. This meeting is not yet.
Yeah, and if I could jump in on that too. I was made aware just at the last minute that Scott Stringer apparently has a NYCHA town hall tonight.
Oh, shit. Oh.
I know. So it may be that some of our NYCHA friends will be a little bit late in joining us because I imagine they would want to tune into at least hear some portion of that. So I'll keep an eye out for them and promote them to panelists when they join us, as well as any of our other folks. But maybe you want to give them a couple of minutes.
Sure. Yeah, we can give it another 3 minutes or so.
So if I can finish my thought. So I had a landlord, by the way, full disclosure, Natalie, I'm a realtor. So that's what, in my old age, I sell real estate. And so I had a landlord, a major landlord in what used to be the affordable part of Williamsburg, and 4,000 units, very nice size, portfolio, all Section 8. Okay. And so I used to rent his stuff left and right. And now, of course, you can't. And he reached the point where he had like an 8-year waiting list. So, but on scale, that's who you're talking about. And then there was one of the landlords made headlines a couple of months ago where he gave the rent, he gave forgiveness of the rent, and he had another several thousand units in the whole thing. That's what we're talking about for this kind of proposal. But we're not talking about the what I used to call the ATM for the city, the small homeowner, who pays through the ears in property taxes, who sneezes and they raise their taxes, okay? So that when these declarations are issued, promulgated, it's the small guy that is really hurt very seriously. Now, we don't have that kind of experience in Manhattan, and we're Upper West Side and all that sort of thing. But it's a citywide issue. And I think that, and if your service extends to the boroughs, then I think it's a consideration that you have to be really cognizant about, but I'm not sure that you are. I'm not sure that this small land homeowner is being taken in this calculus. And I find that very distressing because they suffer a lot. They go through a lot. You know, they always wind
No,
up.
I don't think anyone disagrees. Well, maybe some people do. So I can't say that. But, you know, I do think they have a voice in this discussion. They have like CHIP and RSA that are definitely advocating for their interests. But just pause for a second. Again, Mark, do you mind sharing this slideshow so I can take notes?
You want to do it now?
No, I just mean in general, like, do you mind doing the screen sharing so that I can
Sure. I'm sorry. Yes, absolutely.
note take? Thank you.
But I also forgot to make you co-host, so I'll do that right now. I'm sorry. And Louisa as well.
Melissa is the host. I am listening and learning.
Well, you have administrative authority, even if you're not facilitating the discussion.
Thank you.
Okay. I'll keep an eye on the attendees. I don't know, it's 6:35. Do you want to get going?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
want to keep people. Sorry, I'm just having computer
Just to
issues.
share for everybody who can hear me now, I learned only late this afternoon that Scott Stringer has a NYCHA Town Hall at the same time, which obviously this was long scheduled. So it may be that we'll be joined by some of our friends a little bit later than we expected, but I think we should get going. So Melissa, it's all yours.
Sure. Thanks for everyone who joined. It's nice to see so many board members who we don't always see at housing. One of the good parts of Zoom, for sure, that we get sometimes more people. So tonight, I think as part of our board's ongoing effort to really think through impacts of COVID-19 in our community, not just in terms of physical and, you know, those devastating impacts, but also in terms of economic impacts. And I think those definitely extend to housing, both in terms of homeowners and renters. Of course, we are a community, I think, where we have slightly, if not a lot more renters. So we thought it would be helpful tonight to focus on how renters affected by COVID-19 can potentially stay in their units, what resources are available to them, what kind of advocacy is already happening around this really important topic. And I think that it's in a way becoming more and more urgent as we'll hear more. An eviction moratorium was in place. I think, you know, as we get the clock ticks down on that, people will be more desperate to figure out what solutions are available and what greater policy solutions are being contemplated. So I don't know if my co-chair has anything to add before we jump to our great guest speakers. So tonight, we're first going to be addressed by Natalie. Is it Nikulich? Is that pronounced well?
It's a glitch, but it's fine.
Sorry, from Housing Conservation Coordinators. And then we'll be speaking with Erica Overton from Assemblymember Linda Rosenthal's office, who will give us more of the current state policy thinking around what's happening. So with that, Natalie, do you want to kick us off? And Mark, could you throw up the slides?
Whenever Natalie's ready.
Yeah, absolutely. I can just introduce myself quickly and you can.
That'd be great.
Whenever. But yeah, thank you all very much for inviting me to be here and to speak. Just to introduce myself, my name is Natalie. I'm a tenant organizer with Housing Conservation Coordinators. So we're a housing nonprofit. Many of you probably already know us, but we're a housing nonprofit located in Hell's Kitchen. We serve Hell's Kitchen, Upper West Side. And yeah, we actually assist with more than housing. We also help with immigration, benefits, things like that. And we do organizing and all legal services in addition. And so, yeah, well, the last slide I have in the presentation is like more information about how to get in touch with HCC if you have any questions or want more advice about a specific situation. Is that a good introduction for HCC? Okay,
Perfect.
Great. All right, you can go ahead and pull up the slides, I guess.
Where'd it go?
Yeah, I was just,
I'm sorry.
I was asked to speak about the eviction moratorium and the cancel rent campaign, so I'm mostly going to be focusing on that.
Sorry, nope, that's not it. There it is.
Okay. Thanks, Mark.
All right. So I just wanted to start out. So my organization's HCC. And also, yeah, just to again say I'm an organizer. I'm not like an attorney or anything. So I'm not like giving legal advice. And also, like, if you do have any like specific questions about your housing situation, I definitely recommend reaching out to HCC. And then I just wanted to upfront mention the two other coalitions we work with because they have a lot of really great resources they've put out around all the things I'm going to be speaking about. So the Housing Justice for All Coalition, which is housingjusticeforall.org, and the Right to Counsel Coalition, righttocounselnyc.org. Those are both great organizations and they have all this information on their website and more. So I definitely recommend checking them out. You can go ahead. So I was first going to speak about the eviction moratorium. So just some background. So in response to tenant organizing, the chief administrative judge of New York State issued a memo on March 15th, which stated all eviction proceedings and pending eviction orders shall be suspended statewide until further notice. So since then until now, landlords haven't been able to sue tenants in court. Court's been closed. There have been no evictions. And yeah, all the courts that hear eviction cases are closed. And this has been applying to both residential tenants and in all types of housing and commercial tenants. And currently there is an exception. So if there's an illegal lockout or serious housing, like repair issues, housing code violations, or vacate orders, people have been able to go to court and file emergency cases. And yeah, this is in place until June 20th. You can go on to the next slide. Okay, so there has kind of, since that order is issued, there's kind of been the big question mark up there of what's going to happen on June 20th. So on May 7th, Governor Cuomo issued a new executive order ending the eviction moratorium on June 20th and allowing landlords to file new cases and permitting Marshall's evictions from June 20th onwards. But there is an exception to this. There are some protections for tenants who can show they can't pay rent because of a COVID-related financial hardship. And that exception lasts until August 20th. So between June 20th and August 20th, Marshalls can't evict tenants who've been financially impacted by COVID-19 or non-payment of rent. And it also seems like if landlords want to start a case in court against someone for not paying rent, they're going to have, the landlord's going to have to submit an affidavit stating that they know the tenant has not been financially impacted by COVID-19. And there's also, I'll get to this a little more later, but the state legislature passed a few bills, not last week, the week before, and one of them did have to do with evictions, and those bills, as far as I'm aware, have not been signed by Governor Cuomo. And I unfortunately don't know the details about the exact details, but I'm sure that information will come out. And I should say with this, there's a lot up in the air. So there's also the question of when housing courts are physically going to be open again. And I think as of now, they're planning to be open on the 22nd, but housing attorneys are really pushing back on that because they feel that housing court is unsafe. There's not really any way to socially distance well, and it's going to be a huge health risk. So a lot of this is up in the air, but this is kind of where we stand now. And the last point to that is landlords, because of this exception that landlords can't start a case if someone's been impacted by COVID. Landlords have been asking people for their financial information, and just generally, you're not obligated to provide them with that information, but definitely if you're in this situation and your landlord's reaching out to you, we definitely recommend you reach out to HCC and consult with an attorney to kind of figure out how the best way for you to approach it is. Should I keep going, or should I pause for questions, or should I just keep going and we'll address questions at the end?
If anyone has any burning questions that are very relevant to a slide and you think would be best addressed now, you can feel free, but otherwise I think let's wait till the end.
I'm just curious about what legally would landlords and the courts accept as the fact that you cannot pay the rent because of COVID?
So I believe it has to do with whether you're receiving unemployment benefits or you can prove you've lost income, but I'm honestly not exactly sure of that. I guess the language is because of a COVID related financial hardship. So maybe if you show you lost your job or you lost a source of income, but again, I'm not 100% sure of the details.
Okay.
Yeah.
Should go on.
Yeah, you
Yes.
can go. If no one has any other questions.
Slide 4.
Natalie, did you say that you're addressing commercial small businesses needs as well?
So the eviction moratorium does apply to commercial tenants as well. The work I do
Because
we don't work with small businesses much directly. I know there's a lot of related coalitions that do, but that's definitely a huge.
Yeah. Just let me give an example, just for your thinking. There's a new restaurant on my corner. Turns out to be my favorite. And they were closed for 2 months. They were not even doing takeout. So finally they're doing takeout. And I know the owner. And he's been working with BCI, and he's got his outdoor dining permit and all of that. But he was telling me a few days ago that his landlord is killing him. His landlord wants all of his rent, no forgiveness, and the owner is saying, we've made no money for 2 weeks, 2 months, as you know, 3 months. And he's not even offering him a payment plan.
But you have a bit of an echo.
So I don't think this scenario is you.
Do you have any thoughts on that now?
Sorry, that was a little hard to hear. Can you briefly summarize your question again? Sorry.
Okay, so what about the landlords, commercial restaurants that are being challenged by their landlords to pay all of their arrears up at one time, and they don't want to hear about postponement. They don't want to hear about. They want lump sum payments.
He's on mute.
No money. I'm getting an explanation of what the source is.
Robert, your earphones. We had a problem with that before. Maybe you got to just.
So just pause, Madeline and Robert. Robert, you're on there twice, and I just muted one of you. I don't know which of you is the right one to mute or unmute, but I can try.
That's my double.
Okay, hold on.
Okay, now how's that?
Much better. Much better.
Oh, okay, you did it. Very good. All right, but did I manage to make my question clear on the landlord-tenant relation, and where the landlord is really leaning very heavily?
So I think you were saying, what about landlords who are commercial landlords who are demanding like a one-time lump sum payment.
Yeah, they
back
want all of
rent.
their money. They don't care that they were making no money for 3 months. They don't want to extend payment arrangements. You know, certainly forgiveness is out of the question, but we understand that. But they're pressuring, they're taking small restaurants to court, and they're launching lawsuits to collect their rent. You know, we're getting ready to process eviction notices and the whole thing. This is really just a terrible situation. And I think it's very common. I'm talking about one particular place that's new on my corner, 95th in Amsterdam.
Yeah, I'm just gonna-
Called,
Robert,
and,
sorry, I don't want to.
so what's the experience that has Natalie been hearing about this at all?
Just a quick comment first, just, you know, to preface by saying we're in the housing committee, so it would be helpful to keep our focus there. And also, this is out of my depths, commercial rent. So perhaps our colleagues at BCI might also be looking into this and would want
Yeah,
to
they are.
speak to it in a future meeting. But Natalie, if you do have any thoughts on like what's going on in the commercial realm, please feel free to, you know, jump in.
Yeah, no, I mean, I really only work with residential tenants, so I don't really like feel comfortable speaking to.
Okay.
But I agree,
okay.
it's a very serious situation, and we need to be definitely working in coalition with commercial tenants, because, yeah.
All right. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. So I just did want to share, and so sorry, I should have prefaced this section just by saying the Right to Counsel Coalition has been a really big player in pushing around housing court, you know, to close housing court. And this is the group that fought and won the right to counsel legislation that, you know, within the next few years is going to allow everyone in a certain income bracket who's in housing court to be represented by an attorney. So I just wanted to share the Right to Counsel Coalition put out a set of demands for housing court that we're like going to keep organizing and fighting around. So I just wanted to review those really quickly. So the first one is extend the universal eviction moratorium. The second is ensure everyone facing eviction has and knows about right to counsel. Third is slow down eviction cases. Fourth is hold landlords accountable. So we see certain landlords who we see consistently bringing people to court for reasons that are, you know, unjustified, and we want to make sure that those landlords aren't just allowed to continue kind of basically using the court to harass and abuse tenants. And then also prioritize health, safety, and accessibility. So those are the kind of demands that Right to Counsel is working on right now.
If I can ask, what do they mean by slow down eviction cases? Just like have fewer come into the courts, or? Yeah,
I think so. Again, not an attorney, so I don't know the exact details, but there's a different type. The proceeding in a housing court, I believe, is different than normal proceedings, and it's designed to be more like to basically be able to move faster. I mean, these cases still take a long time because housing court is slow, but essentially, so basically addressing that issue.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, I think we can move on.
Please. When you say hold landlords accountable, are you saying in the amount of times they can go to court per year, or the amount of tenants? What do you mean by accountable?
I am not sure. I don't think there's been any like that. There's anything that specific we're thinking of now. Oh, and someone just put in the chat the link where you can find out more. Yeah, I don't think there's that level of specificity that's been developed yet.
Okay, thank you.
You know, just a consideration, Natalie, that on the slowdown, the process, the landlord, and I guess I'm an advocate this evening for the small homeowner, must always retain counsel. And as these cases drag on, they cost more and more money. So a case could wind up costing a landlord a back-breaking amount. One tenant could cost $10,000 because the representation is you're still on retainer. And so these are all considerations, I think, that the case that I'm making with my earlier example and with this cost is that the small homeowner, and I'm gonna keep using that small homeowner, we're not talking about the big guy, needs protections too. And I don't see that any of this discourse that the small homeowner has any protection at all, really.
Mhm.
So that in the slowdown process, which we would expect, because as it is, the courts are over, they're swamped. As it is, they're swamped. You've been to housing court, of course. You sat there. I'm familiar with the Bronx housing court, and you sit there for hours. And you have several hundred people waiting, you know. And so that these cases are just piling up and piling up.
Mhm.
And in many cases, the small guy, the small landlord is right, perfectly right. Perfectly right. Not a bad guy. So,
Robert,
you know,
Robert, we're not saying, Robert, we're not saying that, but this is discussing the eviction moratorium in terms of the tenants.
I think it's a valid, you know, I think it's a valid discussion of like making sure we don't get slanted too much any one way.
yeah, no, it's all part of the same conversation.
Right. And I'm saying like, I see validity in what Robert's raising. But Natalie, I don't know if you can answer this. Hasn't there been some mortgage forbearance though in New York State?
Yeah, well, I'll get more into that. I'm gonna get into like the rent and mortgage situation a little more. Yeah, I mean, I'll say like in terms of my experience obviously is working in Manhattan, and you know, I see a lot of the big landlords who, you know, have basically seemed like they have unlimited money to spend on cases that often are unnecessary. And
they do,
yeah,
Natalie.
but,
You're right, they do.
Yeah. But I understand that, you know, the situation is different in other boroughs. And I also just want to say like both these campaigns, Right to Counsel and Housing Justice for All, are composed of organizations and like attorneys and stuff from across the city. So it's not just, you know, me as HCC speaking this. This is like our citywide platform. Okay, should I get into the cancel rents? So yeah, so essentially, so there's this, the evictions are being held, are on hold for now, but there has not been any, except for this bill, which passed a week and a half ago, there has not been any form of like rent forgiveness or cancellation. So as of now, you know, everyone's rent is still due. People just are not, can't be taken to court or evicted currently for not being able to pay it. So the Housing Justice for All Coalition, which is a state, and I'll get a little more into it, has been working on like a cancel rent campaign. So you can move on to the next slide.
And just so you know, Natalie, we had a presentation about Housing Justice for All back last June. Wow, that feels so much longer ago, when they were pushing for the reforms to the rent stabilization law. So I think we're somewhat familiar with them and their good work.
Cool. I think the shared screen just went.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had to make sure that we weren't missing some of our presenters in the participants. And I can only do one thing at a time. So here we are again.
No problem. Okay, so you all already know Housing Justice for All is a statewide housing coalition of over 70 groups, and we represent tenants, public housing residents, and homeless New Yorkers. And we came together in 2017 and fought to win historic tenant protections. So before COVID-19, we were fighting under the platform of a New York Homes Guarantee, trying to strengthen protections for all tenants, invest in public housing, and end homelessness by passing 2 statewide rental assistance programs. So you can go on to the next slide. So obviously, when COVID hit, our priorities changed, you know, as everyone's economic situation changed. So the campaign we're working on now is we're fighting to cancel for rent, mortgage, and utility cancellation. So I think to address what you said, Melissa, there was, I don't know as much about mortgages, but pretty early on in this crisis, Cuomo did announce some form of mortgage forbearance, but from what I've heard, it's not very comprehensive. And I heard from one person that the way it worked for them was that they basically got like 3 months of mortgage forgiveness, and they had to pay it all back after that. So from that person, it wasn't very comprehensive, but I can't really speak to the full policy because I'm not very familiar with it. But we are fighting for a full cancellation of rent, mortgages, and utilities. Also a rent freeze for tenants for the next 2 years. And this would be, and so the rent cancellation would need to be accompanied by a small landlord hardship fund. Because, we understand that there are property owners who rely on the monthly rent paid by tenants in order to pay their taxes and pay their bills. And we definitely want those people to be able to have assistance and stay afloat. But we also understand there are some the big landlords who might actually, make a lot of money off of developing housing and housing people who would be the ones best positioned to swallow these costs. So yeah, and I'll go a little more into the why we're fighting to cancel rent on the next slide.
Just a question. Do you mean small landlords, not a small fund for landlords?
Yeah, sorry, small yeah. Yeah, I didn't word that well. And the other point is we're also fighting for housing for the homeless. So both opening up hotel rooms for people and providing long-term permanent housing. Sorry, you can go on to the next one. So I just wanted to go a little bit more into what does cancel rent mean and why we're fighting for rent cancellation instead of like a voucher program or assistance, like financial vouchers for tenants. So what it would mean is all rent, mortgage, and utility payments accrued during COVID-19 are automatically forgiven and never owed. It's universal, it applies to everybody. And no paperwork or red tape, so tenants wouldn't need to prove hardship on a case-by-case basis. And I saw there was a question for how long. I think it would be like as long as the state of emergency is in place.
But, so this would apply to people who did not have any income loss or lose their jobs or anything. So what's the policy justification for that?
So yes, it would. We're making it universal in the hope that it will catch the people who would fall through the cracks or who might have a hard time getting through all the red tape or the bureaucratic stuff. And with the understanding is that some people who don't need it might take advantage of this policy, and some people might, have already. I mean, now we're 3 months into this crisis, so many people who are able to pay their rent have already paid their rent, and will be able to pay their rent. But we'd rather put the burden on landlords to apply for assistance than on tenants.
I guess the word universal is confusing because I'm not sure if it's more like it's an honor system thing and you should be asking for cancel rent if you need it, or it's supposed to be like no one should be paying rent because no one should have to. Do you know what I'm asking?
Wait, sorry, say that again.
So I guess when it says cancel rent is universal, I'm struggling with, is it cancel rent for anyone who actually needs rent canceled, or just no one should pay rent for these 3 months?
Yeah, I mean, I think like the people it's aimed for are the people who are not able to pay rent. But we're using this framework of universal, again, as I said before, because we feel like we don't want people to fall through the cracks on any sort of like relief. And we want the burden to be on landlords to be the ones to apply for assistance.
It's 7 p.m. if anyone wants to take a second and clap for our essential workers.
And everyone here, 94th Street?
Just hear my street.
I usually get my pot.
Okay.
We can go on. There's 2 more like kind of explainer slides,
Yeah.
so we can go over that, and then if other people have.
Are you ready for the next?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, there you go.
So means-tested programs like vouchers and unemployment are slow, bureaucratic, and exclude many of the most vulnerable people like gig workers and the undocumented. And we believe that without a universal policy, thousands will be driven into the streets during a public health crisis. And that's obviously bad news for everybody. New York was already unaffordable. Tenants have permanently lost income and will be unable to pay back rent if they've lost their jobs. When we can't repeat 2008, we need a bailout for tenants, not corporate real estate. I think there's one more I can go over. Oh yeah, and this is just so the kind of way we do it. So there is federal legislation introduced that is basically echoing our demands. Ilhan Omar introduced the Rent and Mortgage Cancellation Act. The governor and legislature could also take action at the state level. And in either case, small landlords would be buoyed by the mortgage suspension and a dedicated hardship fund, as I mentioned before, and corporate landlords would take the hit. And we believe that cancel rent is legal, winnable, and has to happen. So I guess, do other people have questions about cancel rent right now? Okay. So you can move on to the next slide. So this is getting a little bit into the weeds, but there was a bill passed by the and if Erica's here, maybe she can talk more about this at the end, but there was a bill passed by the legislature about 2 weeks ago, or a little less than 2 weeks ago, that basically created, it was a designated $100 million to go to landlords for rent relief in the form of vouchers. And the tenant movement across the state was opposed to this bill, and Linda Rosendahl actually ended up voting no. But it did pass. It has not been signed by Cuomo, so it's kind of in suspension as far as we know. It's not officially law yet. So we were opposed to this bill because it was a landlord bailout. It funneled money directly to the real estate industry, and it didn't offer any additional protections to tenants. It also, as far as we knew, it created a program that would be administered through DHCR, which, that is probably one of the slowest and most difficult agencies to work with. And we think relief through DHCR just comes too late. And also it was too little. The funding was enough to cover at most 25,000 people. But we know there are millions of New Yorkers who aren't able to pay rent or who don't have a stable home. And before COVID hit, Housing Justice for All was working on a series of bills that were taxes on the wealthy in order to bring in the revenue we need to meet the gap.
That was federal funding though, right? Not state funding.
Yeah. So this money, basically the legislature was saying that this is the money that we have been given from the federal government. So this is like the most we can do right now. I mean, I think that was like the argument of the people. I think even the ones, a lot of people voted for it, and they said they understood that it was not enough, but this is like what they had to work with at the moment. But we understand that we're going to need more. I mean, I think everyone understands that we're going to need more because even if and when this bill gets signed into law, it's going to be too little for all the people who have lost income and haven't been able to pay rent. We can keep going unless anyone has questions. So just talking a little bit about our campaign and how we're winning this. So we're doing building-wide rent strikes in a number of buildings across the city in order to put pressure on landlords and also on elected officials to push to cancel rent. We're also having people who are not just individually able to pay sign on to a kind of petition pledge to show how many people are not able to pay rent. And also we're calling our electeds, we're doing banner drops, we're doing social media, and we're reaching out and organizing with our neighbors. So I put a couple links in there for people who are interested in, if you're interested in signing on to the pledge, or if you're interested in sharing your story about how you've been impacted by COVID-19 or how your housing situation has been impacted by COVID-19. So that's the last slide on the cancel rent campaign. So basically, we're continuing to fight for cancel rent. We're hoping, I think, to have some legislation introduced that would match our demands soon. I mean, time is moving along quickly, and we definitely, we're very concerned about what's going to happen with housing courts open and a lot still up in the air. So we're continuing to push for the rent cancellation. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts about that? I don't know how much.
Yeah, my question is, Natalie, are there, in the buildings that you're working with, where you're having rent strikes and so on, are there thresholds for the number of units that would qualify the building for this opposition, or to demand rent forgiveness altogether, a building of more than 10, 12 units or that sort of thing? Or is it just, if a tenant association, if it's a 6-unit building comes to you, and then they're good to go, as well as a 25-unit building?
Yeah.
So what are your thresholds?
So I think the coalition is we're focusing on doing coordinated rent strikes in buildings owned by like corporate real estate or like big landlords. There's definitely people who are organizing rent strikes in their smaller buildings, or who are just, the term rent strike is like a little complicated here, because a lot of people just can't pay. So it's kind of like a rent strike by default. So I definitely think there are people in smaller buildings who are, can't pay or are working to do a rent strike. But I think there's like an understanding that the corporate landlords are the ones that have political influence, and they're the ones who have a lot of money in like politics and things like that, and they're the ones who really need to be targeting right now.
Well, frankly, there is, which is now, it was kind of a sexy part of the law, but the force majeure is now gaining currency big way. And this is all cause majeure, isn't it? But at some point, somebody's got to pay. And I think that's where the stimulus application comes in. And that it is true, they're not lying. There are people that can't pay their rent 3 months. They just had no money. And this is not their fault. It's not the landlord's fault. It's nobody's fault. It is a force majeure. Some people like to say act of God. And you go to court with that, and then the negotiation takes place. But you can't really compel someone to comply with a regulation if they were in a position where it was everything is beyond their control. So I support you in that sense. So I wonder if there's in your legal structure, if that is one of the arguments that you're building up in court as the class action, really, because that's what it is. And now you have to forgive me, but if I always fall back in, if you're going to spend $1 million on a bond, you can spend several $1 million on paying people's rent, so that the money's there. See? And in the same way that we're talking about, I'm not going to depart, I'm not going to go off on a tangent, so don't get scared. So to defund the police, and give the money to youth development and that sort of thing. There is money, okay? There is always money. We have money to go to war overnight. And this is such an extraordinary catastrophe. And there is money. We came up with the stimulus and whatever number of trillions of dollars. And we need another one. And on fiscal policy, we're going to expand the EBT card. People are going to need more EBT cards, and that's sound fiscal policy. You have to get money on the street. So there has to be money for this too. See? Because the landlord, the big landlord, can fight back, and you alluded to it yourself earlier, that they have all kinds of money, and they do. I've worked with them, some of the biggies, okay? And they can fight. And they can keep you in court forever because they have the resources. And so that the forgiveness is it's not a bad argument, but I wonder whether the structure of the argument is the most efficient way, and whether your legal precepts are in place, and to fight this battle, because this is a biggie. This is a biggie, because at the end of the day, what it means, whenever a landlord wins, that means somebody else is going to be homeless. You know, it's just so preposterous. So anyway, so I just wanted to add that thought. And it is it's the force majeure argument, and it has to be taken quite seriously, and it has to be applied. So you have to have your best minds put that on their plate and really and work that argument. That's my note.
We do have I'm not an attorney, but we have many talented housing attorneys who I think are working.
I know you do. Yeah.
Arguments. So.
Yeah, I know you do.
The details, but yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah.
Should we go on?
Yeah.
Okay.
And unless anyone has any other questions.
Something I've heard sort of different advice from different groups, and I'm curious where HCC and your other partners lands on this, but in terms of whether it's a good idea to negotiate with your landlord to make partial rent payments or not, like, is that something that you guys are encouraging, or something that you think is a bad precedent?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I feel like it depends on the situation, and I don't know. I've had some tenants I work with who have had success reaching out to their landlords and negotiating. I would say for the most part, in my experience, I mean, it probably depends on the landlord too. For the most part, the landlords haven't responded, or they haven't really been willing to negotiate. But yeah, so I feel like I don't really have like a single piece of advice overall.
Okay. And so just to transition to the next slide, you know, if people in our community are having issues where their landlords they feel are not keeping the building clean, and more so in this case, private landlords, because we've definitely heard this about NYCHA, and I think it's something important to address, but I don't know that Natalie's the right person to address it. What, you know, recourse do people have, and who should they be reaching out to, especially if they feel like they're not safe?
Yeah, so as I say, there's some guidelines from the Department of Health, so it might be helpful to, you know, use those when you're communicating with the landlord. We've had discussions at HCC about the fact that the courts still are open. Well, I guess the courts are still open for like emergency conditions. I'm not sure if not cleaning the building would fall under that, but I definitely would recommend reaching out to HCC and we can assess, because we are also talking about how potentially it could be a form of harassment to not be cleaning the building, and if people are not feeling safe. So again, I would recommend reaching out to HCC, and you know, we can definitely do I mean, as I say, it depends on the landlord, and I know NYCHA is like a whole, NYCHA is like very challenging. We can definitely do some advocacy and potentially go to court if that's something that's appropriate in the situation.
And Melissa, I'd like to hear from Polly and Madeline on what's happening on that note in NYCHA with late rents and inability to pay rents over the past few months.
Sure, yeah, that'd be helpful. If you guys
are they there? I think they're there, right?
I'm here.
There's Madeline.
Over here.
Madeline. Is Polly also there?
Yep.
Yes. Hi, Robert. How you doing?
Well,
Okay,
one of the problems that I have brought up as far as a recertification, many seniors cannot maneuver doing their recertifications on the computer or the phone. There is no one in the management office, so these people can do a recertification. Now, what I'm fearing of is that they're going to use this as a way of evicting these seniors, which they're already frightened.
Good Lord.
And we were I think Polly was on that call. It was on a Zoom call with Helen Rosenthal, and we spoke to Greg Russ about that. I don't know what they're gonna do about it, if they're gonna extend it or if they're gonna help seniors or what the case may be. Also, with people with seniors on Social Security, they have to send in for award letter to prove for proof of income. I just called today. I'm on disability, but I just called today, and that's going to take forever. So the date that it's due is July 1st, and I'm concerned that it will be eviction notices July 1st and after. So what things can we do to extend the recertifications?
Okay. I don't know if she's responding to Madeline, but what came out of that town hall meeting with Helen Rosenthal, I know that the chair did say that they had set up a phone number so that the seniors or anyone who doesn't have access to a computer can call the CCC number and press number 5, and someone will help walk them through the recertification process. And I do know with the rent statement for this month, the same information is on the back of the rent invoice as far as who to reach out to as far as resources, okay? As far as will there be an extension on the recertification process or the rent, there's no information at this time reflecting that, but that's something that we should look into. I hope that answers your question. Richard?
Is HCC in there with you guys? I mean, Natalie's group, are they in there with you?
Housing conservation coordinators. So I think we represent individual tenants in NYCHA, but we haven't done any organizing in NYCHA. Yeah, so I don't really feel qualified to speak on NYCHA issues, but we definitely do assist tenants. So people should feel free to reach out to us.
But we have seniors who are in their 80s, 70s.
Right.
And you know, there was a thing to tell them to call. Half of them don't know how to use smartphones, and they have what do you call it? Home attendants, and they're not sure how to maneuver through it. And what my concern is that they're not getting the actual information to go through this process. That's what I'm afraid of. They're sitting in their apartments just thinking everything is hunky-dory, and it's not. That's why my concern is that them not knowing what the procedures are, NYCHA would take advantage of that and start eviction notices. That's what my concern is.
What I'd like to see is
can I say
HCC
something?
embedded in NYCHA, the different NYCHA developments, Amsterdam,
Mhm.
Douglas, embedded there in the same way that we used to have the NARC social worker in the different projects. And that becomes your point person that works with Polly, works with Madeline, and works with the different organizers in the different developments. I'm talking for the moment of my district up here, Upper West Side, but that the HCC has its boots to the ground in NYCHA. I'd like to see something like that. Natalie, I'd like to see that.
Well, I do know that NYCHA I got an email recently from NYCHA about a ombudsman core that they're setting up. So I think that's something that will help seniors, whereas they can advocate and mediate for those seniors who may not have family or relatives or anyone to help them. Madeline, if you're aware of any of those seniors, I highly recommend Resident Engagement has made phone calls to their homes. You might want to pass that information on to Resident Engagement to let them know that there are seniors, at Douglas.
Well, I
that
have
are
something
alone.
outside of what Douglas is doing. We are reaching out to seniors who are, like you said, they have no family. There's a group of us. We're doing that now outside of NYCHA.
Right.
So I don't feel comfortable in sending that on to NYCHA.
Okay, no, but I'm saying since they're the ones that have to process the paperwork, notify them and let them know that this person needs to be recertified.
Oh, okay.
That's what I'm saying. So that this
Okay.
way they can get the process started, because you're saying that person is not aware of what needs to be done. So,
Right.
you know,
Okay.
I think that would help.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
I think Mona Lisa.
Yes, hi, how are you all? Yeah,
Hi.
well, my question is,
Tell who you are.
well, first, hi, I'm Mona Lisa from the Dome Site Development on West 84th Street.
Welcome.
Hi, Mark.
Hi, good to see you.
Carly. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Mona.
I'm glad I'm joining this meeting, and you'll see more of me. As far as recertifications, from what I know, because I'm a case assistant worker, I work with seniors. So one of my suggestions is that what they need to be doing is sending out the packages to these people, because like you was talking about with the seniors, they don't have access to a computer. What they wanted was for the seniors to get these packages if they, by calling the CCC. And once they would get them, they're supposed to be calling the management office to make an appointment to drop them off. But we already know that there's nobody available in the management offices lately. They don't help them at all. That's one. And two, I had a question. What protection will the people have against evictions since the governor ended the moratorium on evictions? What happens to the people who are on a fixed income? That's a concern I have.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a big concern.
What do we do about this?
Yeah.
Want me to put up the
Because
slide from
not
before?
only do they live on a fixed income, I mean, there's some people that are even working from home, but they still, I mean, it's been kind of hard for them to put out money for their rent, because a lot of them have kids home too, and still working from home, trying to feed their kids, people not being well, going out and buying all these things to keep things sanitized because nobody else is providing it for us, So, all this money is going out to keeping your house clean, whoever comes in, cleaning the clothes, making sure the kids are safe, or your parents,
Yeah.
And I know that that's going on throughout NYCHA, throughout WISE, through here in my own development as well. It's not easy.
Yeah.
Should I put up the post slide, the post moratorium slide again?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah. I was also just going to say, I think you bring up a really good point, which is that even people who might not have lost their job might still have unexpected expenses during COVID-19, or maybe they had to take time off work to care for a relative who was sick. So, or, there's many other reasons people might have been financially impacted, but it might not be like so easy to prove. And that's, I think, one of the reasons we're really fighting for these universal policies, because we don't want people to have to prove that they have prove that they lost their job in order to get assistance. So yeah, and I mean, in terms of the eviction question, currently as it stands, after June 20th, landlords can start cases, but they're barred from evicting anyone if they can show they've been financially impacted by COVID-19. And that extension goes till August 20th.
Because a lot of people are also having a lot of mental health problems at home, and they're not seeking outside services for free. They're calling their doctors and seeing their doctors and speaking to psychiatrists and therapists,
Yeah.
I know that for a fact, it's really impacted people mentally, and people are scared to go out. We're just in the beginning, about this phase. The summer's not going to be all summer. We know that this pandemic slows down during the heat, But then also what happens later on when it starts getting cold again, Do our kids still stay home? Do we still stay working from home? And then the expenses, is the expenses, rent before food, rent before going to the doctor or washing clothes or whatever,
Yeah, definitely some very hard choices being made that no one should have to be making at a time like this. I want to just mention that Erica from Assemblymember Linda Rosenthal's office joined us. And Erica, I don't know if this is a good transition, if you have any comments to address the thinking in the Assembly right now about what should be happening as the eviction moratorium wraps up and people are facing these hard choices.
I mean, I know, speaking for the Assembly member, that she is advocating for the moratorium to be extended because, like Natalie is saying, it's not good enough to just be, you can't evict anybody, but to bring a case against somebody in June is unconscionable, really. And so and just I don't know, Natalie, sorry, I joined late, so I don't know if you mentioned this, but the vote that Assemblymember Zimberwitz's bill, which was passed a few weeks ago, and I'm sorry, I've lost all track of time. So it could have been like a week ago, or maybe it's like a month ago. I don't remember now, but a period of time, I think it was a couple weeks ago. The Assemblymember voted against his Assemblymember Zimberwitz's rent relief bill because at the end, was a giveaway to landlords. So we want to provide relief to actual tenants, and this bill was giving, it was giving vouchers directly to landlords. Promises later on that that person couldn't be evicted, or there was no tenant protections at all. And it was really just a landlord. It didn't matter if it was a small landlord who actually needs help and money right now, or if it was a big landlord who is, has a huge portfolio and is not really in the same situation as those smaller landlords. And it was only for $100 million, which is really like a drop in the bucket when you really think about all of the needs that people have housing right now. So that was she and I think 9 other Assembly members voted against it to say that that's just we're not going to fund landlords during a pandemic. And also she's also introduced a anti-warehousing bill. There have been many reports after the June rent relief package was passed into law that landlords said in the press, well, I'm going to just withhold my rent regulated apartment from the market because maybe the tide will turn and I'm I don't want to put this on the market now, like screw you essentially. And so we actually had a case in Susan's building where a tenant, there was a rent stabilized apartment available, and this woman needed this rent stabilized apartment for she was adopting her niece essentially, and we knew it was there. She needed to move quickly, and the landlord, Brodsky, said, no, there's nothing here, until we fought and said, no, there is an apartment there, give it to her, which they did. But it shouldn't take us to call them to say, I know you have an apartment, you have to give it to somebody, especially.
If I could just jump in here. This
Yes,
is
yeah.
just one of many opportunities or occasions where Linda Rosenthal's office and her unbelievably spectacular staff has come to the rescue of our tenants. Often they've helped prevent evictions that were unfair, but in this case in particular, it was really spectacular. So bravo, carry on.
Thank you. But that shouldn't come to that. And it's crazy that we even had to negotiate it. And so especially when people are looking for housing right now, or need to move quickly, there should be affordable apartments available. And so she introduced an anti-warehousing bill in the Assembly. I could get you guys the status of where that, what's going on. But that is also one of her priorities. And then one of the other priorities that we've brought up to the governor and to HCR is relaxing the non-primary regulations during the pandemic. We've had a lot of constituents call us who've had to leave New York City for one reason or another. They're taking care of a family member. They can't be here for health reasons. A multitude of issues, and they're afraid that now their landlord is clocking the 183 days and it's going to come after them because they can't make it home now. And so the assembly member wrote a letter to HCR, to the governor, saying we need, like, something has to be done. This affects a lot more people than you think it does, and we're going to have possibly unnecessary evictions later down the road. Not shockingly, or maybe I don't know. They haven't responded to that yet, and they haven't, they haven't done anything on that front. And she's still pushing for it, but it's another priority of hers during the pandemic, because the amount of calls we're getting, is amazing and crazy, but B, a lot of it is non-primary people who are they don't know what to do now. They can't come back here, and they're trying to figure that out. And it's a very stressful thing to think about when you're really just trying to stay afloat at this point. And so those are a few of the assembly members' priorities now.
So maybe you just answered this and I'm asking the same thing again, but
sorry.
are there other relief packages being contemplated right now, or is it sort of all waiting based on if there is a second federal package?
I believe there are, and I can get you all the other bills. There are a bunch of things being discussed right now. It's not, I think it's just in Housing Committee, so it's not ready to come to the floor. But I can get you all of those bills that are being discussed. This way you guys can share with the committee.
That'd be great. And if we can be supportive, please do let us know. Sorry, I jumped in there. Any
rent guidelines board on Wednesday, which is insane that we were actually just talking about giving unemployed New Yorkers a rent increase during a pandemic. When we're looking at, I was looking through all their reports today, and it's like we're looking at 2019 data where they were like, oh, well, cash assistance and SNAP applications have gone down. It's like, well, the federal government is reporting there's been an increase of 40% enrollment in SNAP. So I think all of the numbers we're looking at are pretty fruitless to determine whether or not we're going to get a rent increase based on the stuff they're turning out. So that will be an interesting fight on Wednesday that, of course, Linda will be at. But just to keep that on your radar as well.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
Other questions for?
Yeah, I have a question.
Sorry.
Earlier, you mentioned that if someone isn't residing in their apartment for 183 days, that landlord can recoup that unit. Is that correct? Could you expound on that a little more?
So if you have to live, a rent regulated tenant has to live in their apartment. It has to be their primary residence, and it's 183 days. And if the tenant doesn't live there, or if the landlord suspects the tenant doesn't actually live there, the landlord can bring a case in housing court against the tenant and lay out, you were X, we know that you were X where you were all of these different days. They often have investigators who are watching these tenants, or they're searching their Facebook and all their social media to see where they are. They're looking up, where their mail is going. The super and other people in the building are surveilling to see if they've come in and out of the building, how often. It becomes a whole fight to prove that you had your head, on your pillow for 183 days. It's a tough fight. We've seen a lot of them throughout the years, or since I've been with Linda for almost 7 years, and we've seen tons of them. We've never seen a person lose, but it's a crazy amount of time somebody is spending to prove that they've lived there.
Erica, is that a form of harassment?
I would say I would like to call it that. Yes. I think, they would say, oh, well, we really didn't think they lived there, but a lot of these cases that we've had, it's very clear that the person has lived there. It's not like a cut and dry case of like they had a house in Europe or anything like that. You know, they just weren't around. I would say, yeah, that is harassment. To prove that, it's difficult in itself, but yeah.
In my building, for example, the landlord has installed video cameras throughout the building, and it's not for safety. It's so that they can record and see whether or not you're coming and going, and then watch it. And especially like in the mail room and in the trash area, to make sure that you're still doing that. And they have these riders they put in the lease that talk about if you're not complying with the recycling regulations, that you can be taken to court and you can be evicted. And then they put this together with the video in the mail in the trash rooms. They can see what trash you're putting in. I mean, it's really becomes this horrible sort of harassment, Madeline, to answer your question. Yes.
Yeah. If I could just throw in a quick thought, it is that, which was sparked by Erica's speaking about the Rent Guidelines Board, and just another look back at the 2019 bills that the Assembly member was so instrumental in passing. One of them right now is huge, and that is ending the 7.5% automatic increase for rent-controlled apartments and putting it into the same mix as rent-stabilized apartments. If that law had not passed, then those landlords would be automatically getting that 7.5% increase during the pandemic and crisis that Erica was just talking about. So the power of that is something that I don't want to lose track of as we talk about the next thing going forward. But anyway, kudos.
Can I ask a question about DHCR, Erica? Is DHCR processing rent overcharges, or what's going on at DHCR?
Sorry, Susan. I live next to Amtrak, and I just had a train go by, so I didn't hear what you said.
Asking about DHCR, and are they continuing to process rent overcharge applications? Because we have a number of them in our building that are sort of just twirling overhead at the airport.
HCR is, if you think HCR is unresponsive on a good day during a pandemic, they are, they leave a lot to be desired, especially now. But no, they are, I don't want to say they're not processing them, but it is at more of a glacial pace than what it was before pre-pandemic. They're kind of just hanging there right now. They don't have a lot of some of their database is not online. And so there are very few people who are actually going into the office. And so it's kind of like a juggling of like who's going in to do that. So it's very slow right now.
Okay.
Thank you.
You know, this is not something that's limited to, I live in Mitchell-Lama. Can everyone hear me?
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
I live in a Mitchell-Lama development, and that's part of your terms of occupancy. It is in your proprietary lease. And we have we have captured the apartments of several people over the years. I've been here for 38 years. And some very high-end people, administrators in the city. Because what happens is that people, considering that the rents are subsidized and so affordable, people have second homes. So the requirement is that this is your primary residence, and it is a privilege. It's not a right. It's a privilege that you live here, and you have to treat it. And I happen to support this. I've been on the board several times, and I support this full-heartedly. And that you have, if you can go, we have people who what do you call the Florida people? They go to Florida 6 months and they come back for the snow bunnies or whatever it is.
Snowbirds, yeah.
But that's a common thing. And we had one educator that she had a home in Hawaii. And then she decided to stay there and rent out her apartment. We said, no, you can't do that. Now, we're not watching with cameras. But this is a building where people guard their residency very jealously. And if you're abusive, then this is going to come to the attention of the owners, the cooperators. So I support that occupancy number. It's 183 days, whatever it is. It's equivalent to about 6 months. And you just have to live there. If you don't want to live there, leave and leave your apartment to someone. You know, people out there with children, we have a waiting list that's so long, we just have to close it. We have a 10-year waiting list. Everyone wants to move in here. Okay, so that's not harassment. That's not harassment. You live there or you don't live there. And
excuse me one second. I have friends
Susan?
I have friends who live on West 45th Street who have lived in a rent stabilized apartment for a very long time, and the apartment was in the wife's name because she had the apartment before she got married. And her mother, who's 95, was living in Florida, had a stroke. And my friend moved down to Florida into the house to help her for 2 years, and then came back and forth. And then her husband was still here in New York because he had his job. And then she had a fight on her hands in housing court because the landlord tried to evict her. So it's really, there are situations where it's not okay. We're not talking about somebody's got a place in Hawaii. We're talking about somebody who's gone to live or stay with a family person, and that's just wrong, in my opinion.
I think it's a nuanced issue.
Well, we've had. I hear you, Susan. We've had people that moved to Florida. It was one lady. So that. But the fact, and she was elderly. So when it was cold up here, she went to Florida. When it was warm up here, she came up. And a couple of years that she reached a point where she was elderly enough that she just didn't want to travel anymore. So, and it became quite a struggle. But she had to sell her unit back to the co-op, and that somebody can occupy that unit. And I fully support that. Now, there are cases, as you described, Susan, that are extenuating circumstances, let's say. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about policy and the general rule, and whether it is equitable general rule applicable to everyone. And I support that. I support that. You're in there, you're in a subsidized rent.
Robert.
And you have to be there.
Yeah. So if we get back to Melissa, do you want to go back to the slides? There were a couple of more slides before we finished. I'm not sure where you want to go now.
Wait, Natalie, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong. I thought you just had a few left on like cleaning or like more of an appendix, but do you want to?
Yeah, literally my last one was just like information about how to get in touch with HCC. So it's like very, very quick, but just.
Okay, no, I think that's helpful because you've mentioned a lot. We should reach out to HCC if we have issues, so.
So yeah, just to let everyone know, the office is still closed. So we're all working from home, but we're having all our services available by phone. So this is a phone number you can call, 212-541-5996. If you have questions or need legal assistance on housing, we also do immigration, benefits, domestic violence, consumer debt, and like living wills, power of attorneys, and health proxies through our new older adult program. And we have intake, so we take cases from the community, and we also do have a legal clinic that's just a 15-minute appointment with a housing attorney to get brief advice, and that one is open to anyone from around the city. So just making sure everyone knows that's a resource, along with the intake, which is for, I think, our catchment area is 34th Street to 100th Street on the west side. And those are people we can see for our community intake. So that was it. Just wanted to make sure everyone has that information.
Appreciate it. And thanks, Mark, for reminding us. Any other questions, especially for Natalie and Erica, because then I'd like to just turn our discussion to whether there's something we would want to write a resolution about or recommend or, call for, or if we want to make this just more of a discussion. And then I think if Paul's still here, if he didn't disappear, he mentioned something about the project on 96th Street. I just wanted to address before we adjourned. But any other questions, comments for Erica and Natalie?
I don't see Paul, but
maybe he disappeared.
I have a quick question about 200 Amsterdam. Is that still, I know they've started again because I live right here, but any chance of anything good happening there?
The case is being appealed by the developer, and the courts are obviously in practically a mode of suspended animation. I believe the briefing is going on even while the court itself is not in session, but my suspicion is that there would be something of a significant backlog once they start hearing. And this is a case that, subject to anybody who knows better, my understanding is that this is a case that would be argued as an oral argument before the panel of judges in the appellate court. So the likelihood is that the tiny amount of work left to do for them to finish the envelope of their building will be long finished by the time the argument occurs. And there's no act. They effectively have a stay of the court's order to make them take down the offending floors pending the appeal. So.
And they're back to work tomorrow, Mark, is that correct?
Yes, today.
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 Is it today?
I'm sorry, let me clarify that. They actually filed, they meaning 200 Amsterdam, filed an emergency. Erica,
Yeah.
do you know more about this? They filed an emergency application about 3 weeks ago saying that it was a safety hazard for them to have the top floors of the building not enclosed, and were granted a permit by the buildings department. And in the era of scarce resources, no one had the will to challenge that at the BSA, which of course would have taken 6 months anyway. So they are actually, to answer your question most correctly, Robert, while construction reopened today, the theoretical safe distancing construction site, they've been at it for about 2 or 3 weeks because of this emergency permit. No, I'm not
Yeah,
making that
yeah.
up.
Let's not get sidetracked on.
No,
Okay,
you're not.
sorry.
No,
You, I would
you're not,
ask.
But, okay.
Sorry. Okay, go ahead.
No. So just questions on anything we heard about from Natalie or Erica, or anything specific people have experienced that they want to ask about or speak to. Welcome your comments. I see someone just asked about finding additional resources on legislation that's being proposed on rent relief in the state. So Erica, perhaps you could point us to the right place so that we could share it with.
Yes, I'll send you anything that's being considered right now in any of the different committees, and I'll send it over to you. For sure.
Okay, and we can put it on our website, Mark, is that?
Probably the best way is for Lara Porter, who's asking the question, to correspond with one of us. I'll give you my email. It's Mark, M-A-R-K, Diller, D-I-L-L-E-R, and then CB numeral 7. So Mark Diller, CB7@gmail.com. If you email me your question, then we'll make sure that Erica's response gets to you. The website is a moving target these days.
Okay, thank you. Other
We'll
questions?
try to put it there too, but.
If not, then thank you so much, Natalie and Erica. And if you want to stick around, would definitely be welcome. I just want to sort of open up the discussion of whether we would want to pen a resolution either supporting the cancel rent campaign specifically or with another policy position, and what would that be? And Erica, if you're still here, so do you know if this has made its way into any proposed legislation like this campaign specifically, or is that also just still pending out there?
I don't know for sure. I'd have to send it. I don't, Natalie, I don't know if you
Yeah, we're Natalie.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I know there's like legislation in the works, but I'm not sure like at what stage it is.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But I'll find out from Linda tonight and I'll send it over to you.
Okay, so again, I'll open it up. If there isn't a specific legislative proposal at this time, is this something we would want to wait and see if there is at some point a legislative proposal and support it then maybe, or return to the debate rather, not suppose that we would support it? Oh, Louisa, you're muted if you were going to say anything.
I know. I heard something yesterday, which was that landlords acting as a group are refusing to negotiate with their tenants because they're waiting for legislation, which kind of makes a macabre kind of sense. So given that, I mean, what do we say if that's a kind of round robin? If they're waiting for legislation and everybody else is waiting for legislation, are we recommending legislation?
Federal, state, any flavor?
Federal, I give up on.
I don't think you should.
I mean,
That's
okay.
a tricky one. That's a tricky one. And but if you were to ask me, I would support the support for the tenant, not the landlord, which is the point that Natalie was illustrating earlier, because that would be given to all kinds of abuses. And
But
the
in
small
that
landlords,
case-
all he wants is the tenant to, or she wants the tenant to pay your rent. So if you can help the landlord, the tenant pay their rent, that's all they need.
Okay.
So if we were to recommend taking a side, that's the side that I'm on, the pro-tenant support side, not the landlord support side.
Right, I think that that's understood, and I think most of us are. But are we then talking, if we're talking about a total cancel rent, then you're right, Melissa, we are talking federal funds, because the state can't do that, and the city has to balance
No.
its budget, and the state has a budget
Yeah.
also.
Yeah,
And the only
right.
one who can kind of print money, as they've
You're
shown
right.
that
That's
they are
exactly
doing,
right.
is
That's
federal
exactly right.
government.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah, I think
That's exactly right.
a very good point, and I've heard that come from our city politicians a number of times, that's why they're not supporting cancel rent, because I think it needs to be a federal bailout because of the budgetary impact.
Has
So
this been mentioned as in a future federal bailout bill at all? Other than, I mean, there's the direct payments, et cetera.
I'm not sure.
I'm reading.
It sounds like we don't have enough information right now to
yeah,
Right,
form a
that's a problem.
even though we're sympathetic to the cause, that we're not ready to draft a resolution that would likely pass our full board, let alone have any impact once it gets adopted.
we have just a few audience questions while you're still here, Natalie. I think Erica might have jumped off. From Daniel Bernstein, he asked, if the moratorium expires on June 20th and the eviction cases start immediately thereafter, how will tenants have enough time to prove to the landlord via documentation that they are experiencing hardship and cannot pay rent?
So my understanding of how we think things will work is that the landlord, if they want to start a case in court, they will have to show that they will have to say that they have knowledge that the tenant was not financially impacted by COVID. But yeah,
Right.
question. I don't know if that's clear. I mean, but then there's a question of, are landlords actually going to do investigations, or are they just going to say that? It's complicated. So yeah, I'm not totally sure. I think it's coming up, and it's a difficult situation. I don't know if that answers it, or yeah.
So wait, do you need documentation to prove it, or is it just on the landlord to prove it's not true?
I don't think you should need documentation, but I'm not completely sure. Like, I know I've been writing like advocacy letters that are basically just saying the tenant's been financially impacted, so therefore you cannot bring a case until the end of the governor's order.
Okay.
But again, I definitely recommend, if you're in this situation, consult with an attorney by reaching out to HCC, because I'm not. I think it's a complex and changing situation, and I don't want to give anyone bad information.
Okay.
And also, the Right to Counsel has useful resources, so definitely go on their website, righttocounselnyc.org, I think, and there's a lot of useful information on there too.
Someone asked if there were going to be funding for canceling rent, what would we need in terms of the cost to cover all qualified rents? So I guess that would be for the past few months. It seems, I don't know, have you guys worked to quantify it? It seems like a really large, scary number, but.
Yeah. I definitely don't know the number off the top of my head. I think we have done some estimations and calculations.
That would be helpful for us, I think, if we wanted to think through what it would look like for us to write a resolution, knowing what the dollar amount is that we're kind of asking for. So maybe you or one of your colleagues could loop back with us on that.
Yeah, one of the other things I wanted to say too is It's a little different, like establishing a hardship fund for all tenants who have not been able to pay rent versus canceling rent. Because canceling rent, when we're talking about that framework, we're assuming that some large landlords would be able to absorb the cost of people not having paid rent. So we're not necessarily actually paying back everyone's rent. It's just the rent that landlords need assistance for. And that I don't know if we have a number for that, but I'm happy to continue to share. I'm happy to look that information up and continue to share any information that comes our way.
Okay, that'd be great. So any other questions? Just
I don't have any questions.
this was.
This is back if he wanted to ask this question.
Oh yeah, I think that's apart from Natalie and her important work. So, but thank you for flagging. So in terms of next steps, my inclination is to wait until either there's a bill drafted, or at least we have more information. I don't feel comfortable right now saying like we definitely would support cancel rent, the campaign. Please voice your disagreement if you feel that way. I would love to debate. Or your agreement.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Okay, so let's table this matter. Natalie, again, thank you so much for sharing
great.
with us.
It was great, very good. Thank you, Natalie.
Thanks for hanging in so long. That was really great.
Oh yeah, of course.
Thank you.
All right, nice to see
Very
everyone.
good.
Take
Yeah.
care.
Great.
Paul, since you're back, you had mentioned the 96th Street case, and I just wanted to make sure that we addressed your question. I think you were asking about the 1-unit project. Paul, are you on? Okay. You don't seem to have one of the little microphone icons next to your name, so perhaps you cannot speak, but can hear. Regardless, I think there might have been some confusion. There are 2 projects on 96th Street. There's the Fettner project that came before the board. When was that?
Came before the board in December. It was approved last week.
Right, and which generated how many affordable units?
68.
68, and then there's the neighboring project, which will generate 1 affordable housing unit, which came before.
One on site.
1 on-site affordable unit, which I still am kind of, my mind is boggled that exists, but I just want to make sure that it was clear that those were 2 separate projects, and that the one that went through ULURP and we voted on in December had more than 1 unit. 68, what was it? Okay. Okay. Oh, Louisa, you're on mute.
The lead presenter, I guess that was it wasn't the architect. The architect
so
was the
sorry.
young woman.
Yeah, sorry, Louisa, go on.
I'm sorry, it starts crackling and so I muted and then I forget. Okay. Mark, there was confusion about, or not confusion, we just didn't understand how they had managed to transfer the affordability units from 40 Riverside to that one, so that they claim that they put all their affordability were left in 40 Riverside and they only had to put in 1. And did you understand that when there were a lot of emails going back and forth and documents, and I wasn't sure of what I was reading all the time?
So there are a number of questions that relate to that, that the land use committee was trying to nail down. And the borough, I guess the short answer to the question is that Connor, the new liaison for land use from the borough president's office to CB7, is looking into that whole matter and trying to make sense of this idea that somehow there's 14,000 square feet of quote unquote excess affordable housing that could then be in effect sold, or the credit for it can be sold to the corner building at 96th and Broadway. That's what Ken Lowenstein presented to the combined land use and housing committee, was it last month, basically. Yeah. And there's a lot of us who are skeptical about how that actually came to be and how that works. Connor is taking it. Connor is the liaison, is taking up that issue and is working on it. He asked questions about it as recently as Thursday, so I believe he's still working on it.
Good.
Okay, that's helpful because very confusing. So hopefully that answered Paul's question since we cannot hear him. Okay, anything else we need to discuss before we adjourn?
Oh,
budget. Is that
well, the budget matters, and it's 8 o'clock, so I don't pretend that we want to. But the seed that we want to plant is, and Melissa and Louisa will have received from Cindy, the chair of the budget committee, a memo that talks about how we should be approaching our district needs, especially in the post-COVID environment. And so if you guys would take a look at that, maybe offline, and then be ready to have a more complete discussion in July, and perhaps even prime the pump with your committee members about coming up with key issues, especially key issues that have arisen from the COVID crisis, having to do with housing. That would be a good way to approach. And then, people like HCC and to whom you've reached out, and the tenant leaders at NYCHA buildings to whom we've already reached out, having these inputs would be a great way to try to generate a new, perhaps streamlined, but to the moment, district needs statement and statement of budget priorities. So if that works for you, Melissa, that works for me.
Yeah, just to speak to that very briefly, I think the overall message of that memo from that Cindy forwarded was like, make your list short and the most important things to you in light of the budget crisis, correct? But I actually think it's interesting because housing is facing like one of the biggest cuts. I think HPD had their budget cut by 40%. So, and then, the severe capital needs of NYCHA. So I think housing should definitely have a large role in our budget priorities that we come out with at the end. And, mea culpa, I've been working to schedule a call with the NYCHA reps, and it keeps falling through the tracks, but that's a good flag that Madeline and Polly, and I would like to, get on a call with the tenant leaders and talk through what they're seeing, because it's probably more accurate than whatever NYCHA cites as their needs.
We have Mona Lisa online, and Cynthia. I have a question to ask because we're talking about money and budget, etc. I like to know what happened to the remainder of the $50 million that Collegiate allocated. I think that's something that has never been transparent and clear. I do know that funding went to Wishfish at 2 different locations. So I think that we should explore how that money is being utilized, if there's any funding left. I heard there's like $10 million. Is that true?
Closer to 14, but yes.
Really? Where is
Yeah.
So Polly, that's we are actually already at work on trying to make sense of that. Again, we're working with the Borough President's Office to get to the bottom of some of that. And then the next thing that we'll bring to you is whenever we figure out exactly how much money there is and what it's already been used for, is to brainstorm about how good ways to use the remaining funds. For example, you may remember that there was a former illegal hotel on West 79th Street that is now being converted to senior supportive housing. And Project Find, a terrific community partner, is going to be the service provider there, but they were a little short on the funds needed for the renovation. So, the Borough President's Office and CB7 together tried to direct the project to see if the collegiate funds could be used for that. But that would still leave, like $12 million of that fund. And we definitely want to make sure that that money is used in our district and for the purpose that it was intended.
Right. So, in response to what you just now said, after we determine how much funding is left over, I like to see some of that money allocated to each one of the public housing complexes here on Upper West Side. So that's why I'm interested, because originally back in 2014, 15, we talked about funding being allocated to Amsterdam houses in regard to senior services then. And then unfortunately that kind of fell through. So that's why I'm interested in finding out, how much money is left, and whatever is left, can we use some of that money to improve the quality of lives at public housing complexes, because as you know, NYCHA is, really strained, especially in this area, for services and for other repairs, et cetera. So I'm thinking in terms of some kind of trust fund that could be set up for each one of the developments here, because we have approximately 12 here on the Upper West Side. So I like to see some of that money allocated to public housing.
That's a great idea. Right now, I can't tell you whether those uses are permitted or not, but it's certainly something we should look into.
Yeah,
So
I just want us to look into it.
Yep, I got it.
Okay.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Okay, so
Yeah,
we will,
because that,
sorry, go on.
sorry, just following up on Polly, that really is interesting. It's like the Central Park Conservancy and Riverside Park Conservancy stepped in when the city was letting the parks go derelict. And it would be very interesting to find out if some kind of public-private partnership,
Mm-hmm.
CB7 public partnership could be set up to steer money toward specific areas of NYCHA that
Right.
are felt needs to be done. I mean, if it can be done for the parks, I don't see why it can't be done for NYCHA.
Yes,
Worth
yeah,
asking.
definitely, yeah. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Louisa, because that's exactly where I'm going with this.
Okay, so next month, we'll definitely make it like the item on our agenda to
Okay.
budget and discuss as part of that, obviously, nature.
Okay.
All right. I think we're okay to adjourn unless anyone has any.
Very
Go
good.
have dinner, everybody.
Yep.
Good
All right.
night.
Thank you. This
Nice
is
to
a great
see
meeting.
everybody.
Who joined?
Well
Yeah,
done,
very
everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Congratulations.
Great
Thank you.
meeting. Good to see everyone. Louisa, Susan,
Yeah.
Mark.
Bye.
Thank you
It
all.
was a
Bye.
Good
pleasure
night.
sitting with you.
Melissa.
Thank you for allowing me
Good night,
to.
everybody.
Thank you, Mona Lisa.
Good night.
Thank you, Mark. See you soon.
Good to see you. Good to see you. Bye
Always
now.
thank you, Mark.
Thank you all too.